Excel 2007, prepare to print and distribute your workbooks. We're going to take a look at the various page layout tools and techniques. There is the ability to add headers. You can set a print area. You can have certain items print on every single page. So we'll talk about all these various tricks and how you can insert comments and really clean up your document and get it ready to distribute, whether that be actually printing and distributing by paper or saving it out to a file server or sending it in an email. Let's fix up our expense report, get it ready for printing, and to just simply email out to whoever needs a copy. We're here on the Home tab. We are in Normal View. We can go into Page Layout View if we'd like to see how it's going to actually look if we print it out. Notice that we don't have any headers here. We could always click to add a header. By doing that, we're in this whole new area, Header and Footer Tools. We've got a design ribbon. Just to show you, if we were in regular old Normal View, we could also go to our Insert ribbon and choose Header and Footer from here. And that does the same thing by bumping us back into Page Layout View. This design ribbon is only available for us when we're in our Header and Footer tools. What do we have available? Of course, we could type in any bit of text that we wanted to type. This is Andrew's expense report, Andrew's expenses. When I click outside of it, I see what that looks like. If I wanted to, I could make it a little bit larger, change the font, anything that I want. If I click back here, I'm still in my header. Now what do I want? I can add the current date. Notice here it says ampersand date within square brackets. That's just a symbol for date. If I click outside, I do see the date. When I click in my header, I see the code to find today's current date. If I click over here on the right, if I'd like, I can put the current time in there. I can go to my footer area. Perhaps down here, I'd like to show the file path. This is the ampersand path and ampersand the name of the file. This is coding it so that even if I move this source file at some point in time, the header, when I finally print it, that header will actually update to the proper location. I love putting file paths in the footer or the header so that when I print out a document and I realize I need to make a change to it, I know how to get back into that file as quickly as possible. Instead of really just looking all over all of my drives, I'll know exactly where to go to. Now, that's a pretty long path, so probably don't want it there for the sake of this exercise, but in the real world, it's good to have that. I can click here again to add the footer, and I'll add either a simple page number, or if I know I have a document that has a number of pages, this will show how many pages are in the document, and then I can do page number of number of pages. So this is 1 of 1, but if I had 15 pages, this would say whatever page I was on. Maybe I'm on page 1, maybe page 2, and this ampersand pages is always going to keep count of the number of pages that I have. So 2 of 15, 3 of 15, if I had a 15-page spreadsheet. From here, I can do a couple more things. The name of the sheet, it's just simply going to go and show that. Or I could even insert a picture. Maybe not in the footer, but wouldn't that be nice in the header to put my company logo so it's printed out at the top of a spreadsheet? Just so you see how to do it when you insert the picture, it really does throw you into your dialog box where you can open the file. You just simply navigate through your file structure, select it, and then click Insert, and you'll have that picture in your footer. Well, we've made our headers and footers look pretty good. Again, you click on them, you can go back in here and make some different choices. Maybe I'd like these to scale with the document or align with my page margins, different odd and even pages. Maybe on my even pages, I wanted to say Andrew's expenses, and on my odd pages, I wanted to say not Andrew's expenses. This is something that's more natural when you're printing a Word document, but you still have these functions when you're in Excel. Let's move on now to the Page Layout tab. You're probably familiar with margins. If you've worked in any software program before, this is where you get to select how much non-printable area is going to be on this page. We've got our normal setup, our wide, and our narrow. I do want to point out, in Excel, of course, you can determine how far your header is going to print from the edge of the page versus how far the rest of your document is going to print from the rest of the page. You can, of course, go into custom margins. This is a dialog box that's been around for years and years, and now it's been incorporated into Excel 2007. Here you could get down into specifics regarding your margins. You could also choose, if I had a very small type of spreadsheet, maybe I want that spreadsheet, that information to be centered horizontally and vertically on that page. Maybe I want it right smack dab in the middle instead of too far to the left or too far to the top. I'll leave it the way it is. I want to show you that you also have these other items that we'll take a look at from the ribbon, but I want to point out in this dialog box, you can still go into your headers and footers. If this is the way you're used to, perhaps from a previous version of Excel, you can certainly come in here and do your custom headers and footers with all these same buttons. We have the same tools here. They're just laid out in a different way. On our Page tab, this is where you can choose portrait or landscape if you want to scale your document, what type of paper you're printing to, and the print quality. And you also have this Sheet tab, which is something very interesting, and we're going to spend some time on this notion here shortly. I'm going to click OK just to point out that everything in that dialog box, which by the way you can get by clicking that button as well, is here. Our orientation, portrait versus landscape. Portrait doesn't make sense for our expense report. We want to print it so that we have more width available on the paper than height. We have size. What type of paper are we printing this out to? Of course, you have to have the right type of paper in your printer for this to work. We're fine with letter. Print area we're going to come back to in just a moment. Here's the scale to fit area. Right now we've got width, 1 page, height, 1 page, and that makes sense for us. Have you ever printed an Excel spreadsheet and gotten it all wrong? Because you printed the majority of it on page 1, but then there was just one silly little column that couldn't fit on page 1, and so it printed out on page 2, and you had to tape it together or you had to reprint it. Well, you can help that not to happen by working with the scaling, the width, and the height. You could make it so that you really shrink it down so the width is 1 page, and you might want to, if you have so much data that if you shrink it to 1 page and 1 height, you can't, or 1 page high, you can't read it. So here's where your flexibility is. You might want to give it more pages as far as how many will print out. That's what height dictates. Width is across from left to right. We have scaling grayed out here because I have a very small document. It's only 1 page, so it's not necessary to scale this to fit the page. We'll move over here to sheet options. We aren't viewing grid lines. If I put a check in view, now I can see all the grid lines. Those normally don't print, but if you wanted them to print, you'd put a check mark here. I like it the way it was. The headings have to do with our cell addresses. Now we see cell, column, A, B, C, row 1, 2, 3, 4. Notice when I remove the check, those are gone. I can bring them back. And maybe for some reason it makes sense for those headings to print when I actually print this document. So you'd make sure you have a check mark there if you did want the column headers and the row headers to print. Let's move on back here to the print area. You can set or clear a print area. It used to be with Excel that it would print every single cell in your whole entire spreadsheet, whether or not there was text in there. That was crazy. So you had to set the print area to make sure that you didn't print out, 65,000 pages based off of those cells. It's not the same now. Excel pretty much figures out your range. If you have data in cells, it figures that's what should be printed. But if you have a very complex workbook and you don't want everything to be printed because some of it is workspace where you calculate, or you have different pieces of information used as the source for your calculations, but you don't want it to print, then setting the print area might be the answer that you've been looking for. So in my situation, my print area, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can see what to select. I just want to print out this as my print area. So I select my cells, I go to print area, and I choose set print area. Now, that's all that's going to print. If I had more information down here, it would not print. Only this information is what's going to print. So you select your cells, you choose set print area. Then if I realized I needed more information in then I could just make another selection and choose Add to Print Area or Clear Print Area. Breaks. This is how you can add page breaks. Maybe I have a breaking point and it makes sense that I need to put a page break in there. Then I can just simply click where I want that page break to go and choose Insert Page Break. And it actually did that. It broke the page apart for me. I can go back and remove the page break so I don't have that break right there anymore. This is something that has to make sense with the document that you're trying to print. I can also reset all page breaks if I knew there was some crazy stuff that I'd added in there. If I want to see my page breaks, I can go to View and choose Page Break Preview. And this is saying, hey, here's a hint. You can always click and drag and adjust your page breaks. I can choose OK, and notice I could actually adjust that. Now I've got 2 pages that are going to print. Well, that doesn't make sense in my document, but it's pretty nice because you can finally in Excel see the orientation of what's going to print and click and drag and make it make sense visually to you before you waste all that paper. I'll go back to page layout, and we're on the page layout ribbon as well. Print titles is something that I find extremely helpful when I'm in a multi-page document. In fact, let's open up a multi-page document. I'm going to grab memberships here, and I have tons and tons and tons of pages. If I go to my page layout view, I can see page 1 of 9. Well, I have my headers and items right here. I want this to be visible on every single page because it's not going to make sense if I were just to print out a page that looked like this. I might not really know, well, what's the last name? What's the first name? Is this the business phone? Is this the home phone? What's this date have to do with anything? So that's where this print titles comes in. This indicates what should print at the top of every single page. Rows to print at the top. I want the first row to print at the top. Notice it's an absolute reference from row 1 to what row 1. Maybe I'd want the first 2 rows to print at the top. Rows to repeat at the top. In other words, it's like freezing panes when you're in your spreadsheet, but here it's determining that I always want my headers to print at the top of every single page. Maybe I would have some row headers that would make sense for a column to repeat at the left because that column is the header for every row. Not in this scenario, but you might have that scenario. Just moving along with this dialog box, I want to point out you can also set your print area here, and this is where we had the grid lines if you wanted them to print. And your page order is something interesting also. In a multi-page document that spans more of the window than you can see from left to right, do you want it to print down all the columns and then come back up and print down? Or do you want it to print over from left to right until it gets to the end of the range and then come back over and print? So this just has to do with the orientation of your data and how you want your pages to print. I'll choose OK, and now we've set our print titles. The only thing left in this area is the background. You could really have a graphic that repeated in the background over and over and over again. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, this is not a good idea. And you're right, I can toggle that off. I could go back and I could select something that would be a little bit more appropriate than a tiled fish. Perhaps some sort of watermark that says confidential. You could put that in the background. I'd recommend for the most part if you're adding a background, that would be for the type of document you're not printing, but rather something that you're distributing. Unless, of course, it's a picture that says confidential in the background. But if that's the case, you might want to insert something like a picture here instead of just as the background. We're almost ready to print it. Before we do that, though, we should run a spell check. On the Review tab is where you access your spell check. Of course, you can press F7 to run that on the keyboard also. We have something new, though. We have the Research area. We could search for specific items, and we could look it up actually in reference books, maybe in a thesaurus, maybe in an encyclopedia, maybe on MSN Search or even MSN Stock Quotes. Look at that, Thomson Gale Company Profiles if you're researching some firm that exists out there. all of these various items. So I had membership ID selected. It's got Encarta Encyclopedia. And look at that, all of this information. I looked up. I found some things on Idaho. I would probably have to research that a little bit more to find out information regarding this. But that's cool. Research is a new thing. Of course, thesaurus has been around for a while, but it's now in a different location. It's a little bit easier to use now. So thesaurus, maybe I'm looking for a synonym for the word hot. All right, burning, scorching, boiling, blistering, or antonyms. Okay, cold. So this is pretty easy, and look how many words I got. Fantastic. So that's thesaurus. You also have translate from English to French. Again, I've got membership ID there. Maybe I'm looking at hot again. I'd like to translate that. Bilingual dictionary, hot. Look at that. What kind of hot? I'm hot. It's hot. Can't find it? It always gives you links so you can go out and look in other places. Of course, your system can translate items depending on what sort of software is installed. You might not have the French edition installed on your system, or you might need to go out and find the Spanish or any other type of add-in for Excel that will give you the translations that you need. Close that pane, and I'm going to close this file, our membership file. Nope, I don't need to save changes, just so we're back here in our expense report. I'm also going to go back to View, to Normal View, so that we have our bearings. All right. We're still preparing this spreadsheet to be printed or for distribution. Wouldn't that be nice to insert some comments that would explain what's supposed to go in the lodging area and in the training area of this expense report so people understand it? Well, we can insert comments. They're on the review ribbon. Review, new comment. So first you need to select the cell, then click new comment. Look at this. It looks like one of those little sticky sheets of paper. Please add hotel costs only. I'm sure there are some very serious IRS rules regarding this. And you roll over it and it says, there it is. And you can see this little triangle. Now it's hard for me to tell with this formatting slanted, but I believe I did get the lodging item there. So please add hotel costs only. I could also add something under this training cell. Let's do it down here actually so that you can see what it's like in a cell that's not slanted. New comment, training. Let's just say have a nice day. Notice it says training here because that's what my computer is set up as, but it would actually say the name that your software was registered so that it would make sense. Someone could go back to you and say, hey, I noticed you put a comment in there. What were you talking about? Or we need to discuss this more. All right, so comments are nice. You just roll over them and you can see information. Of course, you can always go back and you can choose to hide the comment or show the comment. You can show all comments at once in a document or remove them all. If you're in a cell here with a comment, you could choose delete. If you're in a cell with a comment here, I'll go to the top one, and when I go next, it's just going to toggle through all of them until I don't have any more. And I'll say, hey, I reached the workbook. Do you want me to come back and loop through it again? Well, sure. Now, instead of new comment, I've got edit comment as a choice here. There is an IRS document on the file share. Please refer to that file so you know more about it. All right, so edit. And of course, I could always choose to delete a comment. Notice if I right-click here and I choose delete, it's saying, hey, are you deleting the cell or the row or the column? It's not saying, are you deleting that comment for that? We've already taken a look at the view ribbon. This is all just really to help you polish up your document. Full screen is going to show it to you, the length of your entire screen. I pressed escape and that brought it back. Show hide. Do I want to see the ruler? The grid lines. That was similar to what we showed before. The formula bar. I love to remove the formula bar when I'm in a spreadsheet that is very text intensive. If there are no formulas and I'm typing a great deal of information in a cell, I don't like what happens to the formula bar. If I'm just typing, I don't want to see that formula bar. I'm going to press escape, and that takes everything out of there. By the way, you can resize the formula bar. And so if I was just typing into this cell, eventually my formula bar is going to take up too much of my space. So you can resize that. You can show to hide it. We already had the headings information before. With the zoom, I can choose to go back to 25%, then everything's real small, 100%, or I could just zoom to that selection so I could really see detailed what's in that cell. That's something helpful if you're editing a graphic, not necessarily as helpful here in Excel. New Window, in essence, opens a read-only version of that same file. Notice I've got expense report 1 and now expense report XLS:2. It's the same file, it's just a different version of it, so I could have 2 items to modify. I'm going to close that. Arrange all is helpful if you have a number of different files open within your Excel, then you can see all of them at once. We talked about freeze panes in a previous nugget. This just makes sure all of your headings are visible on your screen at all times. You can split the window and actually work with 2 parts of it at once. This can be very helpful if you have a very large spreadsheet. I could have the top of my spreadsheet, and I could have the bottom of my spreadsheet. Notice now I can scroll. This is a pretty small spreadsheet, but imagine I had a couple thousand rows. I could be looking at the top 20 rows here and the bottom 20 rows here, and then I could be scrolling in between them. I can toggle that off. This allows me to hide the window, and then this would allow me to unhide the window. Which one do I want to unhide? This one. Saving the workspace is something interesting as well. If I had multiple files open, I'm going to choose Sales Team Performance, and I wanted to arrange these horizontally, we'll say, and I work like this all the time. This is always how I work. Many files open at once probably make more sense if you had a very large monitor or maybe even 2 monitors. If you choose Save Workspace, I'm going to call this Save Workspace. It's in My Documents. Notice it's an XLW file. Now, when I come back to work Monday morning, when I close this stuff out, I can always come here back to the same area where I stored it, My Documents, and here it is, Save Workspace, XLW, right back to the way I had it before. This can save me a lot of time in the long run. If I maximize this window, I can choose to switch window. That will bring this back to the foreground. Switch window. All right, now I can close this item down here, and I'm left just with my expense report. So everything's looking fine. We're ready to print. We've got this quick print button that we added to our quick toolbar in one of the earlier nuggets, but of course I can always go to print here. Quick print is going to send it right to my default printer. Control P on your keyboard does that as well. Or I can go to print, and of course I can select from this down arrow which printer I'd like to print to. How many copies do I want to collate it? In other words, if I'm printing out many copies of the same document, do I want it to print out page 1, 2, 3, and then 1, 2, 3, or do I want all the 1s to print, then all the 2s to print, and then all of the 3s to print? What do I want to print? All of my print area? Maybe just specific pages? Print what? A selection? Maybe I had selected just a small range of cells. Active sheets? Entire workbook? Maybe I want to ignore the print areas and print everything. Entire workbook is going to print all the sheets in that entire file. I wouldn't recommend doing that unless you've gone through and made certain that everything has print areas and it makes sense to print out the entire workbook. That could be quite a bit of pages that you're printing out. And of course you click OK or Cancel. Here's something that I'm not sure if you knew already. If I wanted to print more than one sheet, I could do so by selecting the sheets, pressing Shift. Notice, first I'll point out there's no group there. Now when I press this group, I now have 2 sheet tabs selected for printing. I now have 3 sheet tabs selected for printing. If I were to just to click this quick print button now, everything that was set for print areas on these 3 sheet tabs would go right to the printer. That's pretty quick. That's pretty easy. Group indicates you have more than one sheet tab selected. Notice as I'm clicking around here, group is still showing there. If I click on this sheet, it finally releases. It doesn't say group anymore. So once you print out the grouping, you want to be careful and make sure it's not sticking up there because that could affect other commands that you're trying to run. If you wanted to print out more than one file, you didn't even want to open them, you can do that in the Open Dialog box. Let's say I wanted to print out my sales team performance, and I'll press Control on my keyboard to select more than one, my sales team working data, and also, how about my memberships? These 3 items selected, I can go to Tools here in the bottom left corner and choose Print. By doing that, it really is going to print all the sheets in these 3 workbooks. So again, you got to know what you're dealing with before you send it all to the printer, but isn't that efficient? I don't even have to go through and open up these files at all. I just go to the Open Dialog box, select them, Tools, and then Print. Pretty fantastic. I'm going to click Cancel though. We're preparing this for distribution, so instead of printing it, we might want to publish it or save it or email it. Here in the Prepare area is where we can inspect the document to make sure we don't have any personal metadata in there. I can clean that out before we save it out to a drive or before we email it to others. It takes a look at all this. It looks for any comments. Maybe I don't want my comments set out. It looks for metadata. Those are items that you don't see on the screen, but things that stick in the background that may give data or information to somebody else. It looks for custom XML data, inspects the headers and footers. It looks for all of this information. When I choose Inspect, it's actually going to go through it and do that. Where was I? I was in the Prepare area. I might also want to mark it as Final. Marking it as final is going to make this read-only, because in my situation, let's say I'm Andrew West and this is my expense report, I don't want anybody editing this information. I put this in there. I'm going to mark it as final, distribute it, so my boss can look at it and approve it and the expense report can pay it, but I don't want somebody putting extra numbers in there with my name on it. Marking it as final. We also have the compatibility checker. Excel 2007 is different than earlier versions of Excel. We've known this from the beginning because it's called XLSX as the file name, and you can't open an XLSX file in Excel 2003 or earlier versions of Excel, of course. So the compatibility checker will make sure that this is something that is going to be able to be opened by other users that aren't in Excel 2007. I could put a check here and it says always when I save the workbook, check for compatibility. That's up to you. You have to know your work environment, but I think it's fantastic that this compatibility checker works because it can let you know it's not going to fly with others before they tell you. Can you please resend that email? It just didn't work. Now we're ready to send our document. Do we want to email it as a PDF? Of course, that depends on whether or not our audience has a PDF reader. This is something that can be nice because in general, PDFs are going to be read-only unless someone has a way to crack them. Send it as an email. This is going to go in Microsoft Outlook, which is perhaps the way that your business environment does that. It's pretty common these days. Email as an XPS attachment means that someone has to have the XPS add-in on their system in order to be able to use it, but it's Microsoft's version of PDF in essence. Or maybe I want to fax it right to them. As long as you've got internet fax service set up and it's going to a viable fax machine, then that would work. Probably email is our most likely bet here. And here, of course, is a Outlook document. I just type in whoever it's to, and it's been attached. Well, I really don't have anyone to send this fake expense report to, so I'd say it's time we call an end to this nugget. In this nugget, we talked all about preparing your spreadsheet to be printed and distributed. We looked at the page layout, the various views. We had some print tricks there, how you can print out multiple files without even opening them, for example. We added some comments and we were ready to send this spreadsheet out via email. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.